There's a photograph from May 1st, 1893. President Grover Cleveland stands in Washington with his hand on a golden telegraph button. The dates, 1492 and 1893, are painted in silver on the ceremonial pyramid beneath it. He brings his fist down with such force he nearly shatters the button. 700 miles away in Chicago, an entire city blazes to life. Over 200,000 incandescent bulbs illuminate simultaneously. Fountains erupt in columns of colored light. Giant searchlights sweep the sky, visible 60 miles away. The largest enclosed space ever built glows like a jewel. An entire 690-acre fairground transforms into what visitors called a sudden vision of heaven. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. The Chicago World's Fair. I need you to understand what this meant. In 1893, virtually no American homes had electricity. In cities, a few wealthy mansions might have it. In rural areas, nobody. Most people still used gas lamps, kerosene, or candles. Electricity was something you might see on a city street if you lived in a major urban center. But in your home, almost unheard of. Yet here was a temporary fair, open for just 6 months, blazing with more electric lights than most people would see in their entire lives. But that's not what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is what else happened at that same fair. In the electricity building, Nikola Tesla had a darkened room. 2 large metal plates stood 18 feet apart. Between them sat tables covered with glass tubes. No wires connected these tubes to anything. Tesla activated a high-frequency coil. The tubes lit up wirelessly. Thousands of visitors watched phosphorescent glass glow with what Tesla called cold light, powered by electromagnetic fields transmitted through the air. Some tubes were engraved with the names of famous scientists: Helmholtz, Faraday, Maxwell Franklin. Others read "Welcome Electricians," and produced what contemporary accounts described as a beautiful effect. So let me walk you through what I can verify about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, the documented electrical system with its underground cables and massive generators, the wireless demonstrations that actually happened. And then we need to talk about what became of that wireless technology, and why you're still plugging your phone into a wall. The contract to light the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition went to George Westinghouse and his Westinghouse Electric Manufacturing Company. The bid was $399,000. That's roughly $13.5 million in today's money to light a temporary fair for 6 months. Thomas Edison had also bid for the contract, $554,000 using his direct current system. But Westinghouse, armed with Nikola Tesla's alternating current patents, underbid him significantly and won. How many light bulbs? Sources vary between 160,000 and 250,000. The most reliable documentation suggests over 200,000 incandescent lamps illuminated the fair. To put that in perspective, Westinghouse had to manufacture roughly 250,000 bulbs just to have enough for the fair and replacements. That was estimated to be about 25% of all the incandescent bulbs ever produced up to that point in history. Every building outlined in white bulbs, the massive manufacturers and liberal arts building, at the time the largest enclosed space ever built, glittered with thousands of lights. Edison's Tower of Light in the electricity building featured 5,000 bulbs arranged in an 82-foot column. Giant searchlights mounted on rooftops swept the grounds and the lake. Colored lights illuminated the McMonnies fountain, sending 100-foot plumes of water into the air. This is documented, photographed, measured. Engineering reports from 1893 describe it in detail. The fair consumed 3 times as much electricity as the entire rest of Chicago. The generating capacity was 25,000 horsepower. By comparison, the previous major exposition in Paris in 1889 had used a total of 3,000 horsepower. Chicago's system was more than 8 times larger. President Cleveland literally pressed a button in Washington that was telegraphed to Chicago, starting the Great Alice engine in Machinery Hall, which powered generators that sent electricity through underground conduits across the 690-acre fairground. Visitors had never seen anything like it. Journalist Murat Halstead wrote in Cosmopolitan, "Look from a distance at night, upon the broad spaces it fills, and the majestic sweep of the searching lights. And it is as if the earth and sky were transformed by the immeasurable wands of colossal magicians." Another observer wrote, "It was like getting a sudden vision of heaven." These aren't exaggerations. For people who lived in darkness every night, who had never seen electric light except perhaps on a city street, This was genuinely overwhelming. Imagine you've lived your entire life with gas lamps that flicker and smoke, candles that barely light a room, kerosene that smells and can start fires. And suddenly you see 200,000 electric lights blazing simultaneously in perfect, clean white brilliance. That was the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Now, let me show you exactly how unusual this was. In 1893, the vast majority of American homes had zero electricity. As late as 1907, 14 years after the fair, only 8% of American homes had electricity. 8%? In 1900, electricity provided less than 5% of industrial power in the United States. Factories still ran on steam engines and mechanical systems. In 1925, 32 years after the fair, only half of American homes had electrical power. Half, 1 in 2. For rural America, the numbers were even worse. As late as 1932, only about 10% of rural America was electrified. Farm families were still living by candlelight and kerosene lamps 40 years after the Chicago World's Fair blazed with 200,000 electric bulbs. It wasn't until FDR's Rural Electrification Act of 1936 that the numbers started changing rapidly. By 1945, 85% of American homes finally had electricity. By 1960, virtually all homes were connected. So in 1893, when the Chicago World's Fair opened, you're talking about a nation where electricity was almost entirely absent from daily life. The wealthy might have it in cities. J.P. Morgan's New York mansion was the first home wired for electric lighting in 1882, 11 years before the fair. And even that primitive system was so problematic that the Morgan family had it replaced by the end of 1883. The first commercial power plant, Edison's Pearl Street Station in New York, opened in 1882 and by the end of that year was serving 82 customers and powering about 400 light bulbs. Just 400 bulbs for an entire city. Yet here was the Chicago World's Fair in 1893 with over 200,000 bulbs. The temporary exhibition had more electrical capacity than most cities in America. The fair became the decisive battleground in what history calls the Battle of the Currents, the war between Thomas Edison's direct current system and Nikola Tesla's alternating current system. Edison had been championing DC power. His system worked, but it had a major limitation. You could only transmit DC electricity about 1 mile before you needed another power station. This meant that for a city to have DC power, you'd need power stations every mile or so. Expensive, impractical for large areas. Nikola Tesla had developed something revolutionary, alternating current. With AC, you could use transformers to step voltage up for long-distance transmission, then step it back down for safe use. This meant you could generate power in one location and transmit it many miles, potentially hundreds of miles, to where it was needed. George Westinghouse understood the commercial potential. He purchased Tesla's AC patents and built the system to prove it worked. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair was the test. Edison bid $554,000 for DC. Westinghouse bid $399,000 for AC. Westinghouse won. But there's an interesting detail here. Edison didn't take losing well. 6 months before the fair opened, Edison won a patent dispute over the standard one-piece incandescent light bulb. Suddenly, Westinghouse was forbidden from using Edison's superior bulb design at the fair. Westinghouse had to scramble. Fortunately, he had purchased an earlier patent for the Sawyerman incandescent lamp, a two-piece design with a stopper at each end instead of one piece. Westinghouse rushed to manufacture 250,000 of these bulbs in time for the fair's opening. It worked. When President Cleveland pressed that button on May 1st, 1893, and 200,000 bulbs blazed to life across Jackson Park in Chicago, it was all alternating current. All Tesla system. The fair proved AC was superior. 2 years later, in 1895, Westinghouse again beat Edison, winning the contract to harness Niagara Falls for power generation. That was the end of the battle. A C became the standard for 80% of America and most of the world. So how did they actually wire the fair? This is documented in engineering reports from the time. The system was elaborate and entirely underground. All power was generated in Machinery Hall. Steam engines drove generators that produced alternating current. That current was then transmitted through extensive underground conduits, essentially tunnels and passageways beneath the fairground. The subway system, as they called it, extended approximately 7,000 feet in total length. Not above ground, not strung on poles, underground. These weren't tiny cable runs. Contemporary accounts describe passageways large enough for workers to walk through. The conduits started from Machinery Hall and branched out across the grounds. Manholes provided access for maintenance. The system included separate sections for power distribution, telephone cables, and fire alarm and police signal wires. Power was sent at high voltage through these underground lines to distribution points across the 690-acre site. Then, transformers stepped the voltage down for the incandescent lamps. This is exactly how we still do it today. high voltage transmission, local transformation, lower voltage for end use. The 1893 fair was essentially demonstrating the modern electrical grid on a temporary fairground. And it worked flawlessly. For 6 months, 200,000 bulbs blazed every night. The system was reliable, safe, and spectacular. This is the official explanation. Westinghouse's AC system, Tesla's transformers, underground cables, and central power generation, it's well documented. It's in engineering reports, it's in photographs showing the installation work. And it might be entirely correct. But at this same fair, in this same electricity building, Nikola Tesla demonstrated something that contradicts everything I just described about wires and underground cables. Tesla had a section of the Westinghouse space in the electricity building. His exhibit featured AC motors, generators, transformers, the technology that was lighting the entire fair. But he also displayed something else. Contemporary accounts describe it clearly. There was a darkened room. In this room, Tesla had arranged 2 large metal plates about 18 feet apart. Between them sat long tables covered with phosphorescent tubes and vacuum tubes. No wires connected these tubes to anything. Tesla operated a high-frequency coil, and the tubes lit up, wirelessly. Visitors watched glass tubes glow with what Tesla called cold light, phosphorescent illumination powered by high-frequency electromagnetic fields transmitted through the air. Some tubes were engraved with the names of famous scientists: Helmholtz, Faraday, Maxwell Franklin. Others read, "Welcome Electricians," and produced what one account describes as a beautiful effect. Tesla also demonstrated what he called sheets of crackling light, created by high-frequency discharges between 2 insulated plates. He showed his egg of Columbus, a copper egg that would stand on end and spin using a rotating magnetic field. But the wireless light was what amazed people. PBS literally calls it, Nikola Tesla develops wireless electricity he called cold light. This wasn't a theoretical proposal. This was an actual physical demonstration. Thousands of visitors to the 1893 World's Fair personally witnessed Tesla lighting tubes without any wires connecting them to a power source. Think about that for a moment. At the exact same fair where 200,000 bulbs required extensive underground cable networks, transformers, and massive infrastructure, Tesla demonstrated that you could light tubes with no wires at all. So here's the question that needs asking. Why is your house wired? Tesla wasn't finished with wireless power in 1893. The fair demonstrations were just the beginning. In 1899, Tesla traveled to Colorado Springs and built a massive experimental laboratory. He conducted large-scale wireless power transmission experiments using a giant coil and a 142-foot tower. He successfully lit phosphorescent bulbs at a distance. Accounts vary on exactly how far, but Tesla claimed significant distances. The Colorado experiments convinced Tesla that wireless power transmission was not only possible, but practical. In 1901, Tesla secured funding from J.P. Morgan, $150,000, roughly $5 million in today's money, to build an even more ambitious project, Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, New York. The plan, as Tesla sold it to Morgan, was to build a system for wireless transmission of messages, news, and communications across the Atlantic Ocean, a competitor to Marconi's radio system. But Tesla had a secret, more ambitious goal: wireless transmission of electrical power. Not just signals, actual power. Enough to light homes, run motors, power industry. Tesla envisioned a global system, a network of towers that could wirelessly transmit electricity anywhere on Earth. Construction began. The tower reached 187 feet tall with a 68-foot metal dome on top. Beneath the tower, Tesla dug extensive tunnels and installed an underground network of copper plates and iron rods. But Morgan discovered that Tesla's real plan wasn't just communication, it was wireless power, and Morgan withdrew funding. The official story is that Morgan saw no way to monetize wireless power. How do you meter it? How do you charge people for it? If power is being broadcast wirelessly through the air, anyone could theoretically tap into it anywhere. You can't put a meter on the atmosphere. Additionally, Morgan had massive investments in copper mining. Wired electrical systems require enormous amounts of copper for cables. Wireless power would eliminate that entire industry. Tesla tried desperately to find other investors. He couldn't. Wall Street money was flowing to Marconi's radio system, which was cheaper and actually working. Tesla's wireless power project seemed too expensive, too uncertain, too difficult to profit from. By 1906, work on Wardenclyffe Tower had effectively stopped. Tesla was in debt. In 1917, the unfinished tower was demolished for scrap to pay those debts. Tesla never built another wireless power system. He died in 1943, still convinced that wireless power was not only possible, but superior to wired systems. The tower site still exists. The original brick laboratory building remains. In 2017, ground-penetrating radar confirmed the existence of tunnels extending hundreds of feet beneath the facility, exactly as Tesla had described. The site is now a museum and a pilgrimage destination for Tesla enthusiasts. So let me be very clear about what I can prove and what I can't. The light bulbs at the fair, over 200,000 of them, that's documented historical fact. You can verify this yourself in engineering reports from 1893, in photographs, in contemporary newspaper accounts. Of the wireless demonstrations? Tesla actually did those. Thousands of people witnessed glass tubes lighting up with no wires connecting them to anything. This isn't speculation. It happened. Westinghouse's underground cable system, also verified. 7,000 feet of conduits beneath the fairground. Workers could walk through them. The engineering reports describe it in detail. J.P. Morgan withdrew funding from Wardenclyffe Tower. We have the correspondence. The tower was demolished in 1917. There are photographs of the demolition. These are facts. But here's what I cannot prove. I can't prove that wireless power was technically impractical. I can't prove it was deliberately suppressed to protect copper mining and utility monopolies. I can't prove it would have worked at city scale. Well, and I can't prove it wouldn't have. I can't tell you exactly why Morgan withdrew his funding. We have theories, but not certainty. Here's where things get complicated. The official explanation goes like this. Tesla's wireless power was a brilliant idea, but it had fundamental problems. Efficiency losses over long distances, safety concerns about high-frequency electromagnetic fields, difficulty controlling who could access the power, and it simply couldn't compete economically with the rapidly expanding wired AC power grid that was already being built. In other words, interesting technology, but wired power was just better, cheaper, and more practical. Maybe that's true. But here are some questions that don't have satisfying answers. If wireless power transmission doesn't work, how did Tesla successfully demonstrate it at the 1893 fair? Thousands of people saw tubes light up with no wires. That happened. It's documented. The standard answer is that it works at small scales, but not at large distances. Okay. But Tesla also demonstrated it in Colorado Springs in 1899 at larger scales. He lit bulbs at distances far beyond the 18 feet at the Chicago Fair. The response is that it still wasn't practical for cities and homes. But if the technology was impractical, why did Tesla, a proven genius who had already revolutionized electrical systems with AC power, spend the rest of his life insisting it would work? Tesla wasn't a fool. His alternating current system had just conquered the world. He understood electrical engineering better than almost anyone alive. He'd proven himself right about AC against Edison and virtually the entire scientific establishment. Yet for the next 40 years, until his death, Tesla insisted that wireless power was not only possible, but superior to wired systems. Was he delusional? Or did he understand something about electromagnetic transmission that we've forgotten or ignored? J.P. Morgan was one of the wealthiest, most powerful financiers in America. He'd already invested $150,000 in Tesla's Wardenclyffe project, a massive sum. Why would he suddenly withdraw funding when Tesla revealed the wireless power component? The official explanation is that Morgan saw no way to monetize it. Can't put meters on the air. But think about this. Morgan wasn't just a businessman. He was a monopolist. He controlled industries. If wireless power actually worked, Morgan could have controlled the technology through patents. He could have owned the towers, owned the transmission equipment, charged for access to the system. Instead, he walked away completely. Maybe because it genuinely wouldn't work at scale, or maybe because free, unmetered power threatened too many existing interests. Copper mining, coal, the emerging electric utility monopolies, the entire infrastructure already being built for wired power. Why haven't we seen significant wireless power development in the 130 plus years since Tesla's demonstrations? We have wireless communication. We have radio, television, cell phones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. We're perfectly comfortable broadcasting signals wirelessly over long distances, but power? Still wired. Your phone charges through a cable. Your house gets power through cables from poles or underground lines. Some will point to wireless phone chargers, but those work over distances of centimeters. You have to set your phone directly on a charging pad. That's inductive coupling, not broadcast transmission. It's not what Tesla was demonstrating. Tesla lit tubes 18 feet away. No charging pad, no direct contact. Why haven't we developed that at city scale? The standard answer is that it's inefficient. Too much power loss in transmission. But our current wired system also has transmission losses. The grid loses 8 to 15% of electricity between generation and end use through resistance in the wires. We accept that as normal. And here's the question that I can present but cannot definitively answer. Did the people who control energy systems want unlimited, unmetered power available to everyone? Let me be very clear. I cannot prove there was a conspiracy to suppress wireless power, but I can ask you to think about incentives. In 1893, energy was transitioning from local generation to centralized control. Utility companies were being formed, monopolies were being established. The system being built was one where a few entities would control power generation and distribution and charge for every kilowatt hour. That system required massive infrastructure: power plants, transmission lines, transformers, meters. It required copper mining, coal mining, later oil, and natural gas. Entire industries depended on the wired model. Into this emerges Tesla saying, "We don't need any of that. We can broadcast power wirelessly. The Earth itself can be the conductor." If true, that eliminates the need for most of the infrastructure. It eliminates the ability to meter and control access. It threatens every company invested in the wired model. Did those companies have motivation to ensure wireless power never succeeded? I can't prove it. But the motivation existed. So here are the two interpretations. I'm not telling you which is correct. I'm showing you both. And you can decide. The first interpretation is that wired power won because it's better. Wireless power transmission, while technically possible, at small scales, has fundamental limitations that make it impractical for widespread use. Efficiency losses increase with distance, safety concerns about high-frequency electromagnetic fields, difficulty controlling access and metering usage, and technical challenges in scaling from laboratory demonstrations to citywide systems. The wired AC power grid that Westinghouse and Tesla developed was simply superior, more efficient, more controllable, more economically viable. That's why it succeeded, and wireless power didn't. J.P. Morgan withdrew funding from Wardenclyffe because he realized, after consulting with engineers, that Tesla's wireless system wasn't commercially viable. Good business decision. Tesla spent the rest of his life pursuing wireless power not because it was practical, but because he was stubborn and couldn't accept that this particular idea didn't work at scale. Evidence supporting this comes from modern physics, showing inverse square law limitations for broadcast power. Energy disperses rapidly with distance. Our wireless charging technology today, inductive coupling, works only over centimeters, confirming fundamental limits. This explanation is taught in universities. It's accepted by mainstream science and engineering, and it might be completely correct. The second interpretation is that wireless power transmission was and is technically feasible, but it was deliberately not developed because it threatened established economic interests. Tesla successfully demonstrated wireless power multiple times. Chicago, 1893, Colorado Springs, 1899, Wardenclyffe experiments. The technology worked. What failed was the funding. J.P. Morgan withdrew support not because the technology wouldn't work, but because he realized it couldn't be monopolized and metered the same way wired power could. Wireless power meant anyone could potentially tap into the broadcast energy anywhere. That eliminates the utility monopoly model. Additionally, Morgan had massive investments in copper mining and coal. The entire emerging electrical infrastructure, power plants, transmission lines, transformers, utility companies, represented billions in investments and future profits. Wireless power would make much of that obsolete, so the technology was starved of funding and development. Without financial backing, it couldn't be developed at scale. And over the next century, as wired infrastructure became ubiquitous, wireless power became impossible simply because we never seriously pursued it. Evidence supporting this comes from the fact that we successfully use wireless transmission for communications over vast distances. Why not power? Tesla's demonstrations did work. Modern wireless power research like Witricity shows it's technically possible. The absence of development may be economic, not technical. This explanation is rejected by mainstream science. It's considered conspiracy thinking, and it might be completely wrong. Here's what bothers me about all of this. In 1893, visitors to the Chicago World's Fair saw two things simultaneously: an elaborate wired system requiring massive underground infrastructure to light 200,000 bulbs, and a simple demonstration where tubes lit up with no wires at all. Both worked. Both were real. Both were witnessed by thousands of people. 130 years later, we use the first version. We don't use the second. Why? Maybe because the wired version is genuinely superior, more efficient, more reliable, more practical at scale. Or maybe because the wired version can be monopolized, metered, and monetized, while the wireless version cannot. I can't tell you which explanation is correct. I can't prove there was a conspiracy to suppress wireless power. I can't prove the technology would have worked at city or global scale. What I can tell you is this: the technology existed in 1893. It was demonstrated successfully. Tesla pursued it for the rest of his life. It never received serious development after J.P. Morgan withdrew funding. And today, 130 years later, we still power our homes through wires. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair closed on October 30th, 1893. It had drawn 27 million visitors over 6 months, roughly half the population of the United States at the time. The electrical system that had blazed so brilliantly was dismantled. Most of the buildings were temporary structures made of plaster and wood frames. The White City wasn't meant to last. Some buildings survived for a while. The Palace of Fine Arts became Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, but most were torn down. The underground cable system was pulled up. The generators were removed. The transformers were hauled away. The 200,000 light bulbs went dark. Within a few years, Jackson Park returned to being just a park. But the electrical revolution the fair demonstrated continued. Westinghouse and General Electric battled for dominance in the emerging power industry. AC power grids spread across America and the world. By 1930, nearly 70% of American homes had electricity, all wired. Tesla's wireless power demonstrations were relegated to historical curiosities. Interesting, but impractical. Visionary, but not viable. Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished in 1917. The tunnels were filled in, the copper was sold for scrap. And we built the world on wires. So let me end with this. The next time you plug your phone into a charger, or flip a light switch, or pay your electric bill, ask yourself, why am I using wires? Is it because wires are the only way that works? Or because wires are the only way that was allowed to work? I can't answer that for you. What I can tell you are the facts. In 1893, at the Chicago World's Fair, 200,000 light bulbs blazed from a wired AC system. That's verified. At that same fair, Tesla demonstrated wireless power transmission that actually worked. That's also verified. The wired system received billions in investment and became the global standard. The wireless system was abandoned after J.P. Morgan withdrew funding. Today, we power the world through wires. Whether that's because wires are superior technology or because wireless power threatened too many economic interests, that's a question I can present, but I can't definitively answer. The official explanation is that wired power won because it's better. More practical, more efficient, more economically viable. Maybe that's true. But when I look at those 1893 photographs of Tesla's exhibit, glass tubes glowing in a darkened room with no wires connecting them to anything, I wonder what the world would look like if wireless power had received the same investment and development that wired power did. I wonder if we'd still have power lines everywhere. I wonder if electricity bills would look the same. And I wonder if the reason we'll never know is because someone decided we shouldn't find out. The technology was demonstrated in 1893. The choice was made shortly after. The world was built on wires, and that's the world we live in today. The explanation? That's for you to decide.